In 2017, yesterday we were 165 days into the year. Today is the 166th day of the year. And yesterday morning, the mass shooting in Arlington, Virginia was the 153rd mass shooting out of the 165 days of this year as of yesterday, followed by the 154th mass shooting in San Francisco. We had so we've got 153 so far, and we're about halfway through the year, a little more than halfway through the year. Last year, 2016, we had 384. We're on our way to a little over 300 right now. That was 2016. 2015, we had 334. And 2014, we had 274. Now, in 2014, there were 100 as of June 14th. Again, we're at 153. In 2015, there were 135 as of June 15th. Last year, there were 142 as of June 15th. This year, there's 153. So it looks like we're on course for the biggest mass shooting year in recent history, anyway. The Gun Violence Archive has verified. There's a great article about this, by the way, over at Huffington Post by Nick Wing. The Gun Violence Archive has verified nearly 7,000 gun deaths so far this year, not including suicides. And by the way, about, as I recall, between a third and a half of gun deaths are suicides. So we got 7,000 non-suicide deaths so far, 13,000 injuries so far this year. And who are these people who do these mass shootings? You know, it was I think about a year ago, as I recall. No, this was 2 years ago. In Santa Barbara, Elliot Rodger, this lone gunman, killed a bunch of people. And, or killed, let's see here. He killed seven people. And Karen Tumulty from the Washington Post tweeted out, "Too many people are seeing the Santa Barbara tragedy as misogyny. It's really about mental illness." What if they're the same thing? What if misogyny is a form of mental illness? Now, follow me on this. This is from a piece in Newsweek by Zachary, and I'm sorry I can't tell you his last name because Newsweek's print function is screwed up, and the first 2 pages of every page get chopped off by their header. But in any case, on October 16, 1991, he writes, George Hennard rammed his pickup truck through the front window of a Luby's cafeteria in Killeen, Texas, and opened fire during the lunchtime rush. Wielding 2 semi-automatic pistols, the unemployed merchant seaman shouted about exacting payback on the people of Bell County. And then his first responders moved in and shot himself in the head. When it was over, 24 people were dead, 20 wounded. The majority were women. That was not an accident. He harbored severe hostility for the women who had, in his warped view, rejected or mistreated him. Survivors of the carnage recall he seemed to pass over male customers at Luby's to shoot women on purpose and point blank. Columbine killer Dylan Klebold wrote extensively about his romantic loneliness and a girl he had a crush on. Adam Lanza, who murdered 20 children and 6 adults at Connecticut's Sandy Hook in 2012, had a Word document on his computer explaining why females are inherently selfish. Even Tim McVeigh, who carried out the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, complained about his sexual frustrations and women rejecting him. Misogyny. And Casey Quinlan has a great piece over at Think Progress today about this. And she writes about James Hodgkinson, the guy who was the shooter yesterday. He was arrested for assaulting a woman in 2006, according to NBC News, when she tried to get involved in a domestic dispute. Hodgkinson became, this according to the Daily Beast, Hodgkinson became upset when his daughter refused to leave with him and was also seen throwing his daughter around a bedroom when she refused. He reportedly hit her arms and pulled her hair. Amy Moreland, who was there, told Hodgkinson that she was going to call the police if he kept beating up his daughter, and he punched Amy Moreland in the face. She called the police and filed domestic abuse charges against him. which were later dropped. The guy who shot 3 people at the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood clinic last year, Robert Deere, he had a history of domestic violence. Omar Mateen, the guy who killed 49 people at the Orlando nightclub, perpetrated domestic violence against his ex-wife. In January, Esteban Santiago opened fire in Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, killing 5 people. He had allegations of domestic violence on his record and was arrested last year for attacking his girlfriend. In April, Cedric Anderson opened fire in a special ed classroom in an elementary school in San Bernardino, California. Anderson had a history of domestic abuse and went to the school because his wife worked there. He killed her along with one of her 8-year-old students. In fact, and this is where it gets amazing, according to an Everytown for Gun Safety report, during the 2009 to 2016 period, 54% of U.S. mass shootings were related to domestic or family violence. Elliot Rodger, who killed 7 people in the shooting rampage in Southern California in 2014 after being romantically rejected by several women, vowed, quote, to slaughter every spoiled, stuck-up blonde slut I see, end quote. So I asked the question, I mean, this is, 54% of mass shootings are committed by people who have a documented history of hating women. To the best of my knowledge, all of these mass shootings are done by men. And if 54% of those men have a documented history of violence against women, and 3/4 of all violence against women in this country is unreported, I think it's probably reasonable to assume that somewhere between 3/4 and 100% of them probably have a history of violence against women. So the question, when it became broadly believed, I think the science is still up in the air about it, but broadly believed that people who molested children were probably going to do it again. We set up this whole system nationwide for people who do child abuse and said, no, if you're convicted of this, you can't live near a school, you have to register as a sex offender, or rape. Rape is probably a better example. Rapists say, this is a crime that probably somebody who's done it once, they're going to do it again. And so you have to register as a sex offender. And you can't buy a gun. Should we've been, as a culture, as a society, and this is a function of patriarchy. This is a function of male dominance, male supremacy, whatever you want to call it. We have brushed domestic violence under the rug for years. I mean, just in the last century was the first time that issues like rape were really taken seriously. Should we be doing the same with, quote, domestic violence, men who beat their wives or their girlfriends or their kids, their female children? Should we do this? I think so. I think we should be treating domestic violence. If we did, this guy might never have gotten to be this mass shooter. Of course, Virginia doesn't do background checks. So he legally bought that gun, and he legally owned that gun, and he legally concealed that gun all the way up to the point where he was legal right until he pulled the trigger and shot Steve Scalise. But if Virginia did background checks, and if we treated domestic violence, misogyny, the hatred of women, if we treated domestic violence the same way we treat rape, then James Hodgkinson might not have been able to buy a gun, which means Steve Scalise might have suffered at worst, from having a stone thrown at him. So just to clarify this, okay, just to really, now that we know that the 300 or more, close to 400 mass shootings a year that are perpetrated in the United States are almost always perpetrated by men who have beaten up women, who have committed violence against women, which we call domestic violence. As Joyce said earlier, if a man beats up his wife, they get counseling. If he beats up his next door neighbor, the man next door, he goes to jail. So if there's like this normal threshold of violence, it's beating up the neighbor next door, right, and going to jail, beating up a guy in, in traffic or something, road rage. You can go to jail for that. It's called, assault or battery or, aggravated. There's all these different categories, but basically that's assault. So that's sort of the baseline. Now what we have done is we have diminished domestic violence below that baseline and said, well, domestic violence is not as bad as regular violence. When in fact, there's every indication that domestic violence is an indicator of the potential for something even worse than normal violence, of mass shootings. So if just the simple thing that, if a man, because these are always men who do this, to the best of my knowledge, and if there is a woman out there who is a mass shooter, she is the exception that proves the rule. So if we know that it's men who are engaging in this lower legal category, lower penalty category of behavior called domestic violence, who then go on to become mass shooters. And by the way, there's an element of kind of suicide by cop, go out in a blaze of glory, my girlfriend doesn't love me, so I'm going to shoot up a bunch of people. There's this, you can call it mental illness, you can call it whatever you want, but, so if we were to say, instead of domestic violence being lower than normal violence in the legal category, we're going to raise it above that, like we did with rape. With rape, we said, okay, rape is not just violence. Rape is something that, rapists tend to be recidivists. They tend to repeat their crime. And so they have to register. They cannot buy weapons. We keep an eye on them. When they move into your neighborhood, you get a notice from LifeLock or whatever it may be. I mean, it's like, this is how it works, right? We should be doing that with domestic violence, in my opinion. And making it much harder for people like that to get guns. All the emphasis on this guy has been on the fact that he had Bernie on his website. And that apparently up until the time that Bernie dropped out of the primary, well, actually, I'm not even going to go there. But that focus has completely obscured the fact that this guy has a history of domestic violence. This is the classic profile. I mean, 54% of men who commit mass murders from 2009 to 2016, the last 7 years, 54% of those men who committed those mass murders had documented, in other words, arrests for domestic violence. And, typically you get a lot of violence in before you get arrested. Why don't we elevate this along with the National Gun Registry?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Excuse me, not a National Gun Registry, a national program, where a background check program, national background check. We'll be right back.